My uncle, man of firm convictions, by falling gravely ill, he's won a due respect for his afflictions, the only clever thing he's done. May his example profit others. But God, what deadly boredom, brothers, to tend a sick man night and day, not daring once to steal away, and oh, how base to pamper grossly and entertain the nearly dead, to fluff the pillows for his head and pass him medicines morosely, while thinking under every sigh, the devil takes you, uncle, die.
Eugene Onegin was young, handsome, rich, and bored. He had a life most people in Russia dreamt of. He lived in a grand house full of expensive furniture, in the centre of St. Petersburg. He wore fine clothes and ate the best food. He slept until noon, then spent his days preparing for whatever the evenings would bring. Eugene was often invited to dine with rich and important people from across St. Petersburg. In fact, weeks would go by when he did not eat dinner at home. The only problem was that Eugene was bored. Although he was just a young man, he had become bored of plays and parties, bored of the glittering balls and sumptuous dinners. Nothing seemed to make him happy. Eugene's family had so much money that he had never worked a single day, even at the age of 25. The only thing Eugene did, apart from attend social events, was to care for his old uncle. Eugene's uncle had moved from his grand estate in the countryside into Eugene's home to be cared for by his nephew. He had no other family. "How is your uncle?" the hostess asked Eugene, at the dinner he had been invited to one evening. The table was filled with shining plates, crystal glasses, candelabras, and beautiful flowers. "He is much the same, thank you," said Eugene, leaning over the decorations to give his reply. "The nurse says he is comfortable." "You are so good," said a young lady who was sitting next to Eugene. "Your uncle must be so grateful." Eugene sighed and ran a hand through his light blonde hair. "Honestly," he said, "I do not do much. I visit him in his room, check his nurse has everything she needs, then go again." "Oh, I'm sure you don't mean that," the lady said, giggling. "I'm sure you are a great comfort to him." Eugene did not have the energy or interest to argue with her. His true feelings were hidden. The truth was that Eugene couldn't understand why his uncle would want to live out the rest of his days in his nephew's spare room instead of his own large country estate. When the dinner ended, Eugene climbed into his sleigh. The snow in St. Petersburg had turned all the roads into sparkling, frozen pathways. Eugene's horse-drawn sleigh glided over them on the way to another social gathering. Eugene entered a private box at the beautiful Mariinsky Theatre. Each seat was taken by someone important in St. Petersburg society. Eugene nodded politely to the people he knew in the crowd. The friends who had invited him to the ballet patted him on the back and invited him to sit next to a young lady. Eugene smiled, then opened up his program and pretended to read. It wasn't that the young lady wasn't nice, or interesting, or beautiful. It was that Eugene was constantly surrounded by nice, interesting, beautiful young ladies. They all dressed in expensive silk gowns, and they all wore glittering diamonds or pearls around their necks. He had seen it all before. Eugene had once enjoyed dancing with young ladies at balls and chatting to them at dinner parties. But now it bored him. Eugene was grateful when the theatre lights went down and he could watch the ballet in peace. It was a performance he had seen many times before, in a number of different private boxes. Eugene let out a big yawn. The young lady looked at him in shock. Eugene should have been worried that the young lady thought he was rude, but he wasn't. He didn't care. At the interval, Eugene thanked his friends for the ticket and quietly left the theatre. Once again, he climbed into his sleigh and passed his driver the next invitation. He wondered how many evenings he would spend doing the same thing over and over again. Chapter 2. The following day, Eugene woke at lunchtime as usual. His head felt foggy and his legs ached from dancing. Gio entered his bedroom with a fresh pot of tea and a concerned look on his face. Gio was Eugene's servant. He took care of everything, from Eugene's clothes to confirming dinner dates and sorting through invitations. Gio had known Eugene since he was a young boy, when he was the servant of Eugene's deceased father. He cared for Eugene, feeling protective of his young master. Eugene took the tea gratefully and looked at his servant's serious face. "What is it, Gio?" he said. "Is something the matter?" Gio lowered his head. His hair was greying at the sides, but despite his age he was still strong and capable. "I am afraid I have some bad news for you, sir," said Gio carefully. "Last night your uncle had a fever. I am afraid he was too weak to fight it off. He passed away early this morning." Eugene swung his legs out of his bed and sighed. He felt sad and guilty that he had not been with his uncle when he died. Eugene spent the following days arranging his uncle's funeral. It was a grand affair, with many of his uncle's friends from the countryside coming to pay their respects. When it was all over, Eugene was visited by his uncle's solicitor, who passed on a letter from his uncle. "My dear boy, if you are reading this letter, it means that I have passed away. I have instructed my solicitor to give you this letter. You are my only surviving relative, and so I give my house and land to you. I know you enjoy the bustle of life in St. Petersburg, but perhaps you will come to like the countryside too. There are many farms on my land that need attending, and I trust they are in good hands with you. Yours affectionately, your uncle." Eugene knew he was his uncle's closest relative, but somehow the idea of inheriting his grand estate in the countryside still came as a shock. He couldn't imagine being in charge of all the farms and the workers who lived on the land, or being part of rural society. On the other hand, Eugene thought, perhaps this was just what he needed to escape his current lifestyle. He summoned Gio to start packing. Chapter 3. Eugene stared at the great mansion his uncle had left him. He could tell that it had once been a wonderful house. But not any more. The window panes were cracked and the drains were clogged. The gardens needed weeding and the woodwork needed painting. As Gio took his bags inside, Eugene met the few servants that looked after the house. An old butler explained that when Eugene's uncle had fallen ill, most of the servants had left, and the house had started to fall apart. Eugene sighed at the daunting task ahead of him. Inside the house, the furniture was covered in large white sheets. Eugene passed his hat and gloves to a footman and said to the butler, "This is what is going to happen. You will employ new maids to clean each room and ask the footmen to bring me all the paperwork connected to my uncle's farms. I mean, my farms. My servant, Gio, will tell the cook what I like to eat and when I like to eat it. Now, if you can direct me to the library, I will begin my work." The old butler blinked his wide eyes. He had never been ordered by a master as young as Eugene before. After a moment, he cleared his throat with a little cough. Yes, of course, sir," he said. He clapped his hands at a footman, who scurried off to find the paperwork Eugene wanted. Then he held his arm out to show Eugene the way to the library. As the days went by, Eugene slowly began to get the old house looking more presentable. He ordered some fashionable furniture from his favourite shop in St. Petersburg. He arranged for rooms to be redecorated entirely in expensive new wallpaper. But when it came to the farms on his uncle's land, Eugene was shocked. It seemed the farmers had been working the same way for hundreds of years. It was not the best way to do things. One afternoon, a week after he had arrived at his new home, Eugene summoned Gio. "Take these plans to each of the farmers," said Eugene, handing Gio a thick file of papers. "It tells them exactly what they need to do, the machinery they need to use, and new ways of farming. Tell them that if they do not bring their farms up to scratch, they can leave and work somewhere else." Gio hesitated in the doorway to the library, where Eugene spent most of his day. Sir, if I may say something, Gio said, these farmers may not agree with your plans. These country people are used to a less modern way of life. Eugene put down his pen and stared out of one of the large windows in the library. Since he had arrived at the old house, he had felt slightly better than he had in St. Petersburg. The countryside was different to town, and he had been busy. But he knew Gio was right. The farmers were not going to be happy with him. It is for their own good, Gio, Eugene replied at last. Once these new ideas are put in place, their farms will earn twice as much money for them and for me. They do not have to like it. They do not have to like me. But they must get on with it. As Gio left, he passed the butler who was carrying a silver tray filled with letters and cards. "Excuse me, sir, these have arrived for you," the butler said, allowing Eugene to take the mail from the tray before disappearing again. The letters and cards were from the families who lived on estates close to Eugene's. They had heard of the new, young master and wanted to meet him. Eugene sighed as he went through each invitation. Eugene picked out an invitation from the family who lived closest to his own estate. The Larins had invited Eugene to their traditional spring celebration, a dinner and ball to celebrate springtime on the farms. Eugene planned to go along for an hour at the most. He would introduce himself to the Larins and be polite, but he did not expect to enjoy himself. Chapter 4. The Larins' home was grand and traditional. It was far larger than Eugene's. The gardens were filled with neat little hedges and rose bushes. The driveway was lit up with large pillars that burned brightly as Eugene's carriage arrived. Once again, Eugene was ushered into a large glittering room filled with people. Although the people inside were not as fashionably dressed as those in St. Petersburg, Eugene had to admit it was a pleasant place to be. "Mr. Onegin, you are very welcome," said an older gentleman. He had a kind face, thick grey hair and smart appearance. "I am Dmitri Larin. We met at your uncle's funeral. I was a friend to your uncle for many years." Eugene nodded. "Thank you for your invitation, Mr. Larin," he said politely. "Let me introduce you to my daughters," said Dmitri, leading Eugene to a group of young people. Eugene sighed. This had happened to him many times before. He was young and rich, so was constantly being introduced to someone's daughter in the hope that they would marry. But Eugene did not believe in marriage. "This is Tatyana, my eldest daughter, and Olga is my youngest," Dmitri said. Two young women stepped forward and curtsied politely. Olga looked excitedly between her father and Eugene. She played with the curls of her bright blonde hair and laughed whenever her father said anything slightly amusing. Tatyana was polite but quiet. She was taller than Olga, and her dark hair was tied in a simple plait studded with flowers. Dmitri Larin left the group of young people to talk. It was then that a gentleman who had been standing next to Olga introduced himself. "My name is Vladimir Lenski," he said. "I am pleased to meet you." Lenski was a few years younger than Eugene. He was tall and dark-haired and had an open, friendly face. "Tell me, Lenski," said Eugene, looking around the room, "where would a person find a drink at a spring celebration?" Lenski smiled. "Let me show you," he said, leading Eugene away from the crowd and into a small room filled with fancy drinks. "It is always nice to meet someone closer to my own age. The countryside seems to be filled with old men." Eugene looked at Lenski. He seemed lively and intelligent. "How do you spend your time?" asked Eugene. "When I was your age, I moved to St. Petersburg. It is a more exciting place to be for a young man." "I am a poet," replied Lenski. "I spend my time writing. I cannot move to the city as I would not see Olga each day." Lenski glanced over to the Larin girls, who were now dancing. "Ah," Eugene nodded, smiling. "Does the young lady feel the same about you?" Lenski smiled shyly. "I believe so, sir. It won't be long before we are married." The two young men talked for most of the evening. Even though Lenski was not like Eugene's friends in St. Petersburg, he had enjoyed himself with him. He had made a new friend. Chapter 5. From the night of the Larins' spring celebrations, Lenski visited Eugene's home often. He would come for dinner and read out his poetry to Eugene. Eugene enjoyed the young man's company, even if they didn't always agree on everything. Lenski believed the world was a happy place, and that most people were good and kind at heart. He believed in true love, and that everyone had a soulmate who was perfect for them. Eugene often laughed at his young friend's point of view. He was a few years older than Lenski, and felt a lot wiser. He was much tougher since both his parents had died when he was young. One evening the two friends had decided to take a walk in Eugene's garden. His new gardeners had done a good job of making the previously overgrown garden look nice again, after so many months of neglect. "What are your plans for tomorrow?" asked Eugene. "I am going to visit Olga," replied Lenski with a smile. "That is the third time this week," said Eugene. "I have spoken to her father. We are going to set a date for the wedding soon," Lenski said. Eugene stopped walking and looked at his young friend. "Why must all young men get married?" he said with a sigh. "Because of love," Lenski gushed. "If you knew Olga better, you would see why I love her so much. Come with me tomorrow. I am due at 3 p.m. for tea." Eugene agreed. He wanted to get to know the girl that his friend thought of so highly. Eugene and Lenski sat in the parlour of the Larins' house. Although he had been there for the ball, Eugene had only seen the house at night. In daylight it was even more charming. Olga and Tatyana entered the room, followed by a flurry of footmen carrying tea and cake. "You have brought Mr. Onegin," Olga said, clapping her hands. "How lovely!" "It is nice to see you again," said Tatyana, as she helped the footmen serve the tea. Olga sat opposite Lenski and began to chatter about some gossip she had heard. Eugene tried to keep track of the conversation, but soon lost interest. He sipped his tea and stared at the bookcases that surrounded the room. "Do you enjoy reading?" asked Tatyana, quietly. "Would you like me to show you some of our books?" Eugene nodded. He had to admit he was grateful to Tatyana for taking him away from the conversation. He wasn't interested in town gossip. "My sister gets overexcited when we have visitors," said Tatyana as she walked Eugene around the grand room. "You must excuse her." Eugene smiled. "She must be excited about her wedding," he said. Tatyana paused. "She is," she said, thoughtfully. "Although I think she may be more excited about her dress. The material is coming from Paris." Eugene frowned. While he didn't want to get married, even he knew it should be about more than a pretty dress. For the rest of the visit, Eugene enjoyed Tatyana's company. Eugene asked about how her family had decorated the room, and Tatyana gave Eugene advice on the best suppliers for material and furniture. As the weeks went by, each time Lenski mentioned he was visiting Olga, Eugene would go too. While Olga and Lenski were deep in preparations for their wedding, Tatyana would show Eugene samples of fabric for his curtains, or a book her father had recommended him to read. Although Eugene enjoyed his time with Tatyana, he couldn't help but worry about Olga's behaviour. She talked of dresses and cakes, jewels and fine dining. But each time Lenski had an idea about the wedding, he was ignored. Eugene saw that Olga barely noticed when Lenski was even in the same room. Chapter 6. One evening, Eugene and Lenski had just finished dinner at Eugene's home when Eugene asked, "Are you nervous about the wedding?" Lenski shook his head. "No, I've never looked forward to a day more," he replied. "I think Olga is the best woman in the world." Eugene looked at his friend with confusion. "Do you really?" Lenski's smile disappeared from his face. "Of course," he said. "Why? Do you not like Olga?" Eugene took a deep breath. He did not want to offend his young friend, but he would not lie to him either. "You know my opinion on marriage," he said, "but I personally think that if you must marry, someone like Tatyana would be a much better partner." Lenski stood up from the table and glared at his friend. "Sir, I am offended. I love Olga with all my heart." Eugene stood to meet his friend and placed a hand on his arm. "I apologize, my friend," he said calmly, "but it seems she is more excited about the wedding than being married to you." The friends looked at each other for a moment. It was not in Lenski's nature to be angry for long. He relaxed his shoulders and laughed a little. "Of course, I shouldn't be surprised that you think Tatyana is the better sister," he said. "Why do you say that?" asked Eugene. "It is the talk of the countryside that you are in love with her," he replied happily. Eugene stood back, shocked. He hated gossip, especially when it was about him. He had been spending a lot of time with Tatyana, and he enjoyed her company, but he was not going to become like his boring friends with their wives and families. The truth was, Eugene did not think he could make anyone happy. He struggled to find joy in most things, and he believed marriage would make him unhappier still. Tatyana sat in the window of her bedroom. It overlooked the long driveway of the house, so she could see if anyone was coming to visit. She longed to see Eugene's carriage. Tatyana had never been as happy as she was when she was with Eugene. He was handsome, of course, but he was clever and calm too. He was not like other young men she knew. Olga had told Tatyana that there was gossip about Eugene flying around the countryside. The rumor was that Eugene was in love with Tatyana. At first, Tatyana was sensible enough to ignore unreliable gossip, but as her feelings for Eugene grew, she started to believe that it might be true. She knew from Lenski that Eugene did not spend time with any other girls, and he had just turned 25, the perfect age for a young man to marry. Soon all Tatyana could think about was Eugene and marriage. As the day wore on, it was clear there would be no visitors. Tatyana decided to write Eugene a letter. "My dear Eugene, we have not seen you at the house for a few days. I hope you are well. I had to write to you to express my true feelings. I don't know if I am brave enough to talk about them out loud. Each day I have known you, I've grown to like you more. In fact, I know now that I love you. I wish I knew if you love me too. Lenski is due to visit Olga tomorrow. Please come. I need to know how you feel. Yours affectionately, Tatyana." Chapter 7. A few days later, Tatyana once again looked out of her bedroom window. She was excited when she spotted a carriage in the distance, but her excitement quickly turned to worry when she saw Lenski and Eugene emerge from the carriage door. Lenski looked his usual happy self. Eugene, however, looked stern and unhappy. The look on Eugene's face made Tatyana's heart pound. He looked cross. She couldn't bear it if it was her letter that had made him that way. Tatyana ran into the garden instead of greeting Eugene and Lenski in the parlour like she usually did. Her hands trembled as she looked back at the house. She suddenly felt very silly for sending Eugene a letter. She should have stayed silent. Tatyana played with her long plait and waited on a bench at the end of the garden until she was sure the visitors had left. But as Tatyana made her way back to the house, she came face to face with Eugene. "I received your letter," Eugene said. His face was stern. Tatyana was too scared to reply. Seeing Eugene's face reminded her how much she loved him. "I'm afraid it is impossible," Eugene said, taking a step away from Tatyana. "It is not in my nature to love someone like my friend Lenski does. I am selfish, and I would make you unhappy." Tatyana took a step forward and grabbed Eugene's arm. "No, you wouldn't," she cried. We have so much fun when we are together." Eugene paused for a moment. "I am not worthy of you," he said. "You are too good and kind to understand, but I am not the man for you." With that, Eugene left Tatyana in tears. He refused to turn back and look at her, scared that he might change his mind. Eugene did have feelings for Tatyana. He was just too stubborn to admit it. Eugene stopped visiting the Larins' home. He spent his days in his grand house, watching the seasons change from the library window. He was deeply unhappy. He had made his mind up to be alone forever. As much as he liked Tatyana, he had decided long ago that he would not marry. At the Larins' house, Tatyana was devastated. Since that moment in the garden with Eugene, she had felt worse and worse. It was hard to get up in the morning. Thankfully, she had her sister's wedding to distract her. Olga stood on a stool in her bedroom wearing her wedding dress. The dressmaker was adding little pins around the hem. Tatyana smiled at her beautiful little sister. "What are these?" Tatyana asked, picking up a pile of envelopes from her sister's bedside. "Oh, they are silly love poems from Lenski," Olga said, smoothing the white silk of her skirts. "I never read them." Tatyana frowned. "Why not?" she asked. "They must mean a lot to him." "Oh, Tatyana," said Olga, giggling. "I tell him they are wonderful, and then he is happy. It doesn't matter if I actually read them or not." Tatyana felt bad for Lenski. He loved Olga very much. But Tatyana couldn't help wondering if Olga felt the same way. Snow had started to fall heavily in the countryside around St. Petersburg. Lenski rode his sleigh to Eugene's house. They did not see each other as much as they used to. Since the day Eugene had spoken to Tatyana in the Larins' garden, Eugene had refused all invitations he received. Lenski could not understand why his friend was so determined to be unhappy, but he had a plan that he thought would help him. He joined Eugene by the fire in his library. It looked as though Eugene had not slept. "You must come out with me, Eugene," said Lenski. Eugene sat back in his chair and stared at the fire. "Why?" he replied, sighing. "I have been to too many parties, too many dinners, too many balls. I thought moving to the country would change my life, but it is the same here. I am bored with life." Lenski was sad that his friend felt this way. He couldn't help but think that if Eugene admitted how he truly felt about Tatyana, he would be happy again. "It is Tatyana's birthday tomorrow night. Dmitri has asked if you will come. It is only a small gathering, simple food and friends." Eugene leant forward a little. His face softened. "Does Tatyana know I have been invited?" he asked. "Of course," Lenski replied. "She would be happy to see you, as would Olga and I." Chapter 8. On the evening of Tatyana's birthday, Eugene dressed smartly, gathered a small bouquet of Tatyana's favourite flowers, and got into his sleigh. He hoped he could use this quiet gathering to make friends with Tatyana again. He could not marry her, but he couldn't imagine not seeing her again. But, as his sleigh bounced over the snow-covered driveway of the Larins' house, Eugene could see that the event taking place was anything but quiet. Lots of sleighs were parked outside, and the house beamed with light and laughter. Eugene could see women in fine dresses climbing the stairs to the front door, moonlight glinting off their diamonds. Eugene had seen it enough times. This was a ball. Lenski had promised him the evening would be a quiet dinner. This was anything but that. Eugene threw the bouquet he was holding into the bushes and contemplated going home. A ball was the last thing Eugene wanted to attend, with 100 pairs of gossipy eyes watching everything he did. Lenski had lied and tricked him into coming. Eugene entered the ballroom and skirted around the dance floor. Lenski was standing with Olga, Dmitri and Tatyana next to a table filled with presents. When Lenski caught his eye, he smiled. But Eugene was too angry to smile back. "My dear boy," said Dmitri, patting Eugene on the shoulder. "We have not seen you for such a long time." Eugene did not know what to say. He looked at Tatyana and realized with horror that she had tears in her eyes. She ran from the ballroom. Eugene grabbed Lenski's arm and pulled him to one side. "You said this was going to be a small dinner," he said angrily. "You said that Tatyana knew I would be here when she clearly didn't. She is upset." "I knew you would not come if I told you it was a ball," replied Lensky calmly. "But I thought it would be nice for you to have some fun." Eugene felt rage bubble up inside him. "You thought it would be fun to have my life gossiped about? You thought it would be fun to make Tatyana cry on her birthday?" he asked. Lensky shook his head. "I am sorry she is upset," he said. "I confess she did not know you were coming, but I am not sorry I lied. You need to get out more, and I thought Tatyana would be happy to see you. It is clear you love each other." Eugene stared at his young friend. How dare Lensky tell him what is good for him? How dare he lie to him and upset Tatyana on her birthday? Most of all, how dare Lensky tell him who he was in love with? He had made Eugene feel like a fool. What's more, he knew there was some truth in what Lensky had said, and that made Eugene angrier still. Eugene's rage cooled, and he began to think more clearly about how to get back at Lensky. He turned and walked to where Olga was standing watching the dancing. "Olga, you look very nice this evening," Eugene said, bowing to Olga and taking her hand. "May I ask you for this dance?" Olga stared at Eugene. She could not remember if he had ever spoken to her before, but she was flattered by his attention. She nodded and took his hand. For the rest of the evening, Olga did not leave Eugene's side. When Lensky tried to ask her to dance or to sit with him, she politely refused and danced with Eugene again. Although it was seen as wrong to dance with one partner all night long, Eugene kept asking Olga to dance, and Olga kept saying yes. Tatyana did not return to the dance floor. Lensky grew angrier and angrier. When it was clear Olga was not going to dance with him, he left the ball in a rage. At the end of the evening, Eugene kissed Olga's hand and said good night. Olga watched him dreamily as he climbed back into his sleigh and left. Tatyana cried herself to sleep. Over the week since they had last met, she had tried not to think about Eugene. At first, she did not want to do anything for her birthday, but Olga was determined to have a ball before her wedding, so she agreed. When she saw Eugene, the feelings she had felt that day in the garden when he had rejected her came flooding back. It was too much to see him again. Tatyana wondered if she would ever stop loving him. Chapter 9. When Eugene woke up the day after Tatyana's ball, he felt bad. He had not slept well. He kept imagining Tatyana's face as she ran out of the ballroom in tears. He also felt bad about dancing with Olga all night. He did it to get back at Lensky for lying to him. He knew the one thing that Lensky loved more than anything in the world, and he took it from him. Eugene had not been dressed for long when he heard a knock on his door. The butler showed a young man into the room where Eugene was having breakfast. Eugene recognized him from his time in St. Petersburg. It was a man called Zaretsky. Zaretsky was known for getting involved in scandals, but he wasn't usually the cause of them. He was famous for organizing duels to end them. "Zaretsky," said Eugene, standing up from the table. "It's not often we see you out of the city." Zaretsky flashed a wicked smile. He was around the same age as Eugene and dressed in the highest fashion. His eyes were always a little tired from whatever party he had been to the night before. "I think you can guess why I am here," Zaretsky said, handing an envelope to Eugene. Eugene took the envelope and knew what it was before he had opened it. It was an invitation to a duel, and it would be from Lenski. "Is Lenski this upset with me that he wants to fight me in a duel?" asked Eugene. "That is correct. I received a messenger from him late last night to organize the duel as soon as I could. He has asked me to be his second in command," said Zaretsky. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m., at the far end of the Larins cornfield. Do you accept?" Eugene sighed. How could his young friend be so stupid? Lenski had threatened him to a duel simply for dancing with Olga. He felt the familiar feeling of anger rise up in him. "Very well," Eugene snapped. "If that's what the foolish boy wants." Zaretsky smiled. "Wonderful. We will see you and your second in command on the dueling field," he said. After Zaretsky had left, Eugene sat back at his table. He no longer had any appetite for his breakfast. He opened the envelope Zaretsky had given him. "For disgracing the honor of my beloved Olga." Eugene sighed. He had agreed to the duel. It was done, and there was no backing out. Lenski waited anxiously outside the Larins family home. He needed to see Olga before his duel with Eugene the next morning, in case the worst happened and he was shot. The Russian winter was setting in, and he hopped from foot to foot to keep warm. Eventually, the Larins butler let him in. Olga was discussing her wedding cake with her cook when Lenski entered the parlour.
"Oh, good, you are here,"
she said happily.
"Do you think we should have 3 cake layers or 4?
Lenski was confused. He imagined Olga would be feeling terrible for how she behaved at the ball, desperate for his forgiveness. "Olga, I need to talk to you about last night," Lenski said, seriously. Olga looked at Lenski, confused. "Last night?" she asked. "What do you mean? I had a simply wonderful time." Lenski looked at the cook, who was listening to every word of their conversation. Olga dismissed her, but carried on doodling a drawing of the cake on a piece of paper. "Olga, do you not see how wrong it was of you and Eugene to dance all night?" Lenski asked desperately. Olga laughed. "Oh, that," she said. "I thought he was rather charming. I don't think I've done anything wrong, though. You do make a fuss about such silly things." Lenski stared at Olga. Perhaps she was too young and innocent to see the damage Eugene had done to her reputation at the ball. It made him even more determined to go through with the duel. That night, Lenski wrote one final poem to Olga. It would be a poem to remember him by, if the worst happened the next morning. Chapter 10. The ground was hard and frosty. Grass crunched beneath the feet of the 4 men who were standing in the Larins cornfield. Zaretsky was not happy. "Your second is meant to be a gentleman, a friend, not a servant," he said. Eugene looked between Zaretsky and Gio, his servant. "I believe a second is meant to be someone to take care of you, should the worst happen. Gio is the person I trust most in this world," Eugene said. "If you do not like it, call off the duel." Zaretsky huffed. He had attended many duels before and liked to follow the proper rules. First, a formal duel challenge must be delivered and accepted. This had been done yesterday. Then, on the day of the duel, the seconds must discuss the argument to see if it can be resolved without duelling. Zaretsky and Gio met in the space between the 2 young men. "My master agrees that he should not have danced with the young lady for so long," Gio said. "However, my master also believes that the young lady in question does not care enough about Mr. Lenski to notice. He believes he is wasting his love on her." "What?" Lenski shouted, his anger rising. "How dare you?" Lenski could not work out if he was angry because his friend had been rude about Olga, or if it was because, slowly, he was realizing that Eugene was right. "I don't think we are going to solve this, gentlemen," said Zaretsky, rubbing his hands together. "Time to duel." Zaretsky and Gio stepped away as Lenski and Eugene went back to back.
10 paces and draw,
called Zaretsky. Each man started to walk away from each other, leaving footprints in the frost. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 2 shots were fired, but only one man was hit. Lenski crumbled to the floor. Eugene dropped his pistol and ran to his friend's side. It was too late. Chapter 11. When Lenski died, Eugene was full of guilt. He told himself over and over that he should have ignored the duel. He should have spoken to his young friend before the duel to stop it taking place. He shouldn't have danced with Olga that night at the ball. Eugene did not leave his house for weeks. He would not see or speak to anyone. Eventually, he could not stand to be in the rooms where he had spent many enjoyable times with Lenski and Tatyana. He imagined them at his dining table, walking in the gardens or sitting by the fire. One day, Eugene asked Gio to pack his bags for him, and he left. He did not tell anyone where he was going, or when he would be back. Olga mourned for Lenski until the spring. She was sad, but mostly angry that he had been so silly as to get into a duel. It was the custom for fiancés to wear black and not attend any parties or balls for at least 6 months. But 4 months after Lenski died, Olga was engaged again. She married an officer who was high up in the Russian army, and finally had the wedding of her dreams. This left Tatyana alone in the countryside with her parents. After her sister's wedding, Tatyana would walk the gardens and sadly remember the days she had spent with Eugene and Lenski. The winter was drawing in once more. Eugene had been gone for nearly a year. Olga had set up her own grand house in St. Petersburg, and the Larins decided to visit. "We will stay with Olga until after Christmas," declared Dmitri. "She has made lots of new friends, so there will be plenty of people to talk to." Tatyana smiled. Part of her was excited to visit St. Petersburg, and she missed her sister. But there was one thing Tatyana wanted to do first. Tatyana asked Eugene's old butler if she could look for a book that she had lent to Master Onegin. Really, she wanted to see the house one last time. Tatyana wandered the empty rooms. Once she had imagined being married to Eugene and living here. She imagined what she would do to each room, the parties she would hold for all their friends. Eugene had not said goodbye when he left his country house. Tatyana had heard the news from one of her maids. Walking through his house was her way of saying goodbye to him. Slowly, Tatyana made her way back to the front door. As she stepped out into the fresh, cold air, Tatyana finally felt able to move on. Chapter 12. Olga squealed as her parents' carriage pulled up in front of her grand 4-story townhouse. She flew down the steps and hugged her parents and sister. Before they had reached the front door, Olga had told them all the plans she had for their visit.
"We have 20 people coming for Christmas," Olga said. "Lots of the officers and their wives and children. It will be a full house."
Tatyana smiled at her sister. It was hard to believe that a year ago she was dressed all in black after Lenski's death. The house was just as Tatyana imagined, full of expensive furniture and chandeliers. The parlour had comfy chairs and sofas, and the dining room could seat as many as 40 people.
"Tell me, sister,"
said Olga as they sat together in front of the fire,
"would you like to get married?"
Tatyana sipped her tea thoughtfully.
"Perhaps some day,"
she replied.
"My heart has been broken, but it is not beyond repair."
Olga clapped her hands together. With her own wedding dreams fulfilled, she was keen to start planning another.
"Well then, we must see who we can find for you."
Tatyana spent the following weeks happily going to balls, parties, plays and dinners. Her sister's new friends were lively and fun. They were also sophisticated. Tatyana discussed art and politics, subjects she had been too shy to talk about with Eugene. "Your sister is so clever," said one of Olga's new friends as they had afternoon tea in one of St. Petersburg's most fashionable cafes. "Oh, I know," said Olga. "She's read 20 times as many books as I have." Tatyana smiled and enjoyed the compliment. She felt herself slowly transforming around these new people, from a shy girl into a confident young woman. Christmas was everything Tatyana thought it would be. Olga was the perfect hostess and never stopped entertaining her guests. The rooms were filled with Olga's husband's friends from the army. Most of them had children, but there was one who came on his own. He was a general in the army, and very well respected. He was a little older than Tatyana, and had a smart moustache and friendly brown eyes. After a big Christmas dinner, Tatyana sat by the fire in the sitting room chatting to some of Olga's friends. She noticed the general by the doorway. He seemed to be staring at her. Soon he came closer. "Excuse me, ladies," he said politely with a little bow. "May I have the honour of speaking to Miss Larin alone?" The other women disappeared, whispering and giggling. Tatyana smiled at the general as he sat down. "It is lovely to finally have the chance to talk to you," said the general. Chapter 13. Eugene returned to St. Petersburg the following spring. He had been travelling around the south of Russia and Italy for over a year. He visited beautiful galleries and famous cathedrals, but he missed his home. However, he still could not face going back to his house in the country. Everything reminded him of Lenski or Tatyana. Gio prepared Eugene's old house in St. Petersburg so that it looked like he had never been away. Eugene thought that a year spent travelling would help him to feel better, but it did not. He looked at his old home, the street outside, and the pile of invitations on his desk, and he felt the same way he had 2 years ago. Bored of life. But now he felt the guilt of taking his best friend's life too. Eugene decided that he would attend a ball. If he did not go out, he would spend the evening thinking about how miserable he was. The ball was held by an old friend of his uncle's, and it would be filled by the most fashionable people in St. Petersburg. As usual, when he arrived that evening, he handed his coat to a footman and took a drink. He smiled and chatted to old friends and told stories of his travels. Suddenly, he noticed a small group arranged around a fireplace. One of them was Olga Larin, giggling loudly as she often did. There, sitting next to her, was Tatyana. Eugene gasped at her transformation. She no longer wore her hair in a long plait. Instead, it was elegantly styled up. She wore a fine dress and a calm, happy look on her face. She looked more beautiful than ever. He waited until Tatyana was alone. "Hello," he said. Tatyana stared at him for a moment, as though he were a ghost. Then her face relaxed. "Hello, Eugene," she said. "It has been a long time." Eugene nodded. "I have only just returned from my travels," he said. "I am sorry I did not say goodbye when I left the countryside. I could not face what I did to Lenski. I had to get away." Remembering the awful duel, Tatyana could not meet Eugene's gaze. "How is your sister?" Eugene asked. "She is very well. She is married," replied Tatyana. It was then that Eugene noticed the ring on Tatyana's finger. Tatyana was married too. "You are married?" he asked, his eyes burning into hers. Tatyana nodded happily. "I am," she said, "to a general in the army. We have been married for a month now." Eugene could not take the information in at first. Then he felt his chest tighten and his hands begin to shake. "Congratulations," Eugene said, his voice shaking. If You'll excuse me. I must be going."
"Wait," cried Tatyana. "Here is my address. I live in St. Petersburg now. It would be lovely to see you again."
Tatyana handed Eugene a small card with her name and address on it. Eugene nodded and fled the ballroom. Chapter 14. That night, Eugene decided to write Tatyana a letter. He had been wrong about many things in his life, but now he realized how wrong he had been about Tatyana. He had refused to love her because he was afraid of making her unhappy. He was afraid of them turning into a boring married couple. Now he saw that Tatyana was the only person who could have ever made him happy. He wrote the letter and asked Gio to deliver it that very night. "My dearest Tatyana, seeing you this evening feels like a curtain being drawn from in front of my eyes. I realize now that I should never have refused your love. I have always loved you. Perhaps if I had admitted my feelings, Lenski would not be dead, and we would be together. I know that you are now married, but I wish there was a way that we could be married instead. Tell the general you have changed your mind. Tell him that you love me. Please reply soon, Eugene." Tatyana did not reply to Eugene's letter. She did not reply to his second letter, or his third letter either. Each morning, Eugene would wait for his post to arrive. As usual, there would be invitations to dinners and parties, but nothing from Tatyana. After 3 weeks, Eugene could take it no longer. He waited outside Tatyana's house until he was sure the general was not there. Then he knocked on the door and demanded to see Tatyana. He found her in tears, with his letters on her lap. "My darling Tatyana," he said, kneeling by her side. "I did not mean to make you cry, but I must tell you how I feel. I wish I could turn back time to that summer in the garden. I know now that I can't love anyone else but you." Tatyana sniffed and looked at Eugene. Her tears stopped falling and she stood up, letting the letters fall to the floor. "It is not fair," she said. "It took me months to stop loving you. Just when I started to feel happy, here you are again." "Have you stopped loving me?" Eugene asked. Tatyana shook her head. "No, of course I still love you. That is why I could not reply to your letter. If I replied, I would be betraying my husband. I am married to a good, kind man. He does not deserve that." "But now we can be together," cried Eugene. For one small moment, Eugene thought he might be happy at last. Tatyana still loved him. "No," said Tatyana. "We can't." She took a handkerchief from her pocket and dried her eyes. Then she smoothed her hair and dress. "I am married to someone else. It is too late. You are wrong to tell me you love me. Now, I think it is time to leave." Eugene backed away from Tatyana and left her house, just as the general returned. Gio served Eugene his evening meal as he sat alone in his bedroom. He had lost Tatyana forever, and it was all his own fault. "Sir, may I have your permission to say something?" Gio began. "Something, perhaps, a servant should not say." Eugene waved his hand. "If you must," he said, poking at his food with a fork. "You have been through a lot these past years," said Gio. "I think you would agree you have not been kind to yourself, or others." Eugene sat up and stared at his servant. "But, sir, you are still young," Gio continued. "You have a long life ahead of you. Learn from what has happened. Do not let it defeat you." Gio gave a small bow and left Eugene's room. Over the months that followed, Eugene remembered Gio's words. Slowly, he began to feel better. Eugene finally realized what it was to love someone. It was a wonderful feeling. Eugene made a promise to himself that he would never again let a chance of love pass him by. That was Eugene Onegin by Alexander Pushkin, adapted by Gemma Barder, read by Dan Bottomley.